So we left off at the home screen of our Anaconda Navigator, which is the graphical interface of the Anaconda data science and scientific computing distribution. From here, let us launch Jupyter Notebook. Actually, before we do that, what are Jupyter Notebooks? They're simply interactive computing environments that allow us to create, execute, and share code in a web-based environment. They evolved from an interactive computing project known as IPython, which is short for Interactive Python, and they come with the IPython kernel, which makes it possible for us to execute Python code from within each notebook. Okay. Certainly, other programming languages are also supported with Jupyter Notebooks, but in this course, we will focus on Python 3. All right. Let's just launch a notebook because this may sound too complicated until we see it in practice. So I click launch here and my Mac is starting the Jupyter Notebook server. All right. So if we head back to our browser, we should see something that looks like this. This is our server environment. It lists the file and directories from the location where we launch it. It lists all the terminals and notebooks that are currently running, and it has some ability to coordinate the clusters if we're doing parallel computing. All right, back to files. Let's create our first notebook. Over in the right-hand side, I'll head back to New, click on Python 3 as our kernel, and sure enough, we have our first Jupyter notebook. Okay. First things first, let's give it a name. If we click on Untitled, in the pop-up, we say our first notebook. And then we click Rename. Excellent. Now, what's going on here? Well, this is an environment for us to run Python code and document it along the way and maybe test out different ideas and then put it all together and then publish it to the web or send it to our friends or colleagues. This is the power of a Jupyter Notebook environment. It allows us to execute code, see feedback immediately, and then share it very easily so that we can get some feedback from other people we're working with. Okay, let's start by going into the first cell and executing some Python code. We'll say print. Welcome to the bootcamp. Okay, so far so good, but nothing happened. This is just Python code sitting in a cell. In order to run this, in order to execute this cell, we have to click run. We have to tell Jupyter Notebook that we're done coding within this cell and we now want it to execute and we want to see the output that it produces. So let's just click run. Excellent. So the notebook executed the code within the cell, gave us the output of that code, and then created a new code cell for us to continue our work. Very nice. As we work with notebooks more and more, we'll get used to some very productive shortcuts so that we don't always have to go in here and click run. For instance, the shortcut to execute the code in a given cell and then move on to the next cell is shift return. So shift plus return. Return or enter in a Windows environment. Okay. So I just commented this out using control question mark. And if let's get some other code here. So let's say we want to add the number 2 plus 7. All right. This is valid Python code. It's waiting in our code cell to be executed. So in order to execute this and move on to the next cell, we could again click run, or alternatively, we can try shift enter. Very nice. So the notebook does the calculation, executes the code, gives us the output, and then creates a new code cell for us. There are many, many other shortcuts available in a Jupyter Notebook. If we head over to help, under keyboard shortcuts, we see that there's a whole array of them. It's probably more than 100 here, or 50 at least. Yeah, I haven't counted, but there's a lot. The important distinction is between command mode, which we enter by pressing escape, and edit mode, which we get into by pressing enter. Now, command mode allows us to manipulate cells, delete them, copy them, move them around, and change their type. Whereas edit mode allows us to operate within a given cell, right? So these are two important distinctions because different shortcuts will only have meaning depending on the mode that they're defined in. For instance, right now we're on command mode. So whenever we see this blue highlight here, we are in command mode, which means that we could operate on the cell by deleting it, moving it around, inserting something above, or inserting something below. Once we click on the cell or we press enter, notice what's going to happen here. This is going to go from blue to green, okay? And that indicates that we are in edit mode. So now we can add code within this cell, all right? So let's write some more code, this time importing pandas as PD. This is a convention in the pandas community to import the pandas module as the alias PD, okay? And we are in edit mode as indicated by the green highlight here and the fact that we have a cursor that's blinking. So to execute this cell, remember, shift, enter, and it executes and we move on to the next cell where we are in edit mode. All right. Notice that every time we executed a cell, within square brackets, we got a number, an integer. This indicates the order that we executed the cells. In a Jupyter notebook, we can go back in time and execute prior code cells. For instance, print welcome to the bootcamp was the first code cell that we executed. But now that we have 4 code cells executed, we could go back to our first cell and run it again. And notice what's going to happen here. No problem. It's going to go from 1 to 5. So if we press shift enter, there we have it. So the notebook is keeping track of the order in which each cell executed. Okay? And by the way, after we do an operation, maybe define a function, import a module in a given cell, all of those imports and all of those functions and all of those local variables are accessible by other cells that execute after it. So that's why this order is important. So the notebook operates on this order, not the order that we see visually. It's the order that the cells execute in. All right. Now, so far we've explored only code cells. All of these are code cells. Even in this one cell where we commented it out, this is the way we comment in Python. So technically this is Python code. It just consists of a single code cell. So in here we can go and say 3.1 times 4, and the entirety of this cell consists of Python code. We have a single line of comments and as well as a single expression multiplying a floating point number by an integer. So if we execute this, sure enough, we get its output. But all of these were examples of code cells. In Jupyter Notebooks, we also have 3 other types of cells. Most importantly, we have Markdown. So if we convert a given cell to Markdown, then we can go inside there and we can type comments. For example, this is our first notebook. We're practicing the dynamics and shortcuts. Okay, so if we click Shift Enter, we see that Python does not try to execute this as Python code. It just keeps it as a Markdown cell. Very nice. And if you're familiar with Markdown, there is a very specific syntax where we can add perhaps a list using let's include a header. Let's say in this bootcamp, we'll cover pandas basics, pandas data manipulation, advanced pandas techniques, and much more. All right. So notice that this code cell is just, this markdown cell is just containing some text, now a bulleted list that we created, but no Python code. The Jupyter notebook is not trying to interpret this as Python code. Why is that? Well, it's because we indicated that this is a markdown cell. If we click on on the cell above, notice that this is a code cell. So when we execute this, the notebook will try to interpret it as Python. All right, so these were the basic dynamics of a Jupyter notebook. Remember, there are code cells and there are markdown cells. If we want to execute the code in a given cell, which we will be doing a lot of, I recommend getting used to this shortcut of Shift-Enter to execute the code in a given cell and move on to the next. If you want to get really quick with Jupyter notebooks, I recommend exploring the shortcuts, especially if you find yourself repeating a certain operation many times. Okay.